Strange tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Strange Tales from Liao Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you two short stories. The first story is titled Monk Jean. Monk Jean was a native of Zhucheng in Shandong province. His father was a scoundrel who, shockingly, sold him to Wulian Mountain Temple for a mere few hundred coins, consigning him to a life as a monk. As a child, Monk Jean was mischievous and dull-witted. He neither recited scriptures nor chanted Buddha's name, nor did he understand the rules of monastic life. Instead, he was relegated to menial tasks like tending pigs or running errands in town. He resembled a hired hand at the temple more than a monk. Later, Monk Jin's master passed away, leaving behind some money. With that inheritance, Monk Jean resolutely left Wulian Mountain Temple and embarked on a business venture. Although he was clumsy as a monk, he was exceptionally skilled at speculative trade and trickery, demonstrating remarkable cunning in commerce. In just a few years, he amassed great wealth, purchasing extensive properties and land around Shupo, including hundreds of acres of fertile fields. Monk Jean built an elaborate estate encircling Shupo. The residents within his estate were predominantly monks, with only a few ordinary folk, mostly destitute families with no livelihood. Monk Jean allowed them to rent rooms and work his fields. The houses they lived in were connected, while Monk Jin's main residence occupied the central area. His front hall was richly decorated with carved beams and painted rafters, exuding opulence. The tables and screens in the hall were polished to a mirror-like finish, reflecting clear images. His private quarters in the rear were even more luxurious. The door curtains and bed canopies were made of exquisite brocade, filling the air with a fragrant aroma. His intricately carved sandalwood bed was inlaid with tortoiseshell and mother-of-pearl designs of birds, flowers, and human figures. The bed was covered with thick brocade mattresses, and the walls were adorned with famous paintings of beauties and landscapes. Monk Jin's entourage during his outings was equally impressive. At his command, dozens of attendants would respond in unison with a thunderous roar and enter his presence. These attendants, wearing small hats and leather boots, formed orderly lines. While serving their master, they became soft-spoken and deferential in their behavior. If a guest arrived unexpectedly, Monk Jin's household could prepare a lavish banquet of over a dozen tables in no time, serving piping hot dishes one after another like a flowing stream. Despite his wealth and grandeur, Monk Jean, mindful of his past identity, dared not openly keep courtesans in his household. Instead, he raised over a dozen handsome young men at home. These youths were not only attractive but also clever and charming. They often wrapped their heads in black veils and performed dances while singing slightly risque songs with impressive skill. When Monk Jean traveled, his grandeur was unmatched. He was accompanied by an entourage of dozens of mounted servants, their waists adorned with bows and arrows. As they rode, the clinking of their weapons created a rhythmic, resonant sound, adding to the spectacle. The servants respectfully addressed Monk Jean as master, while townsfolk referred to him as ancestor, uncle, or elder, but never as his Dharma name or title of monk. Not only that, but Monk Jean also established connections with various powerful factions, even enlisting the help of relatives and friends from hundreds of miles away. Using these ties, he exerted influence over local authorities, and those who inadvertently offended him were struck with fear. Despite his momentary prestige, Monk Jin was, at his core, a coarse and uncultured man, exuding an air of rusticity from head to toe. Throughout his life, he never read a single Buddhist scripture, recited a single verse, or stepped foot in another temple after leaving Wulyan Mountain Temple. His household contained none of the sacred implements typically associated with monastic life, to the extent that his disciples had neither seen nor heard of such objects. The women renting homes in his estate were required to dress like aristocratic ladies from the capital, with makeup and clothing provided at Monk Jin's expense. In this regard, he was exceptionally generous, resulting in over 100 villagers idling away their days instead of farming. Occasionally, some vicious tenants even killed monks living in Monk Jin's estate, burying their heads beneath their beds. Yet, Monk Jin did not pursue these matters deeply. He merely expelled such tenants from his property. Over time, this laissez-faire approach became an unsettling norm in his household. Monk Jin also adopted a boy of a different surname, treating him as his own son. He hired renowned tutors to teach the boy classical Confucian essays. The child was extraordinarily gifted and excelled in his studies, eventually passing the imperial scholar exam to become a Zhai. Monk Jin spared no expense, bribing officials to secure the boy the status of a government student. Soon after, the boy took another examination and succeeded in becoming a jurin. Because of this foster son's achievements, people began addressing Monk Jin respectfully as Grand Duke Jin, and the Jin family's reputation soared. Those who previously treated him as an equal now referred to themselves as his juniors, bowing deferentially and performing the rituals of filial descendants. Not long after, however, Monk Jin passed away. At his funeral, the foster son knelt before the spirit hall, clad in mourning garments, his face streaming with tears as he lamented that he was now an orphan. Funeral staves brought by Monk Jin's followers were scattered haphazardly across the room. Yet, behind the funeral banners, the only person softly weeping was the foster son's wife. Noblewomen from scholar-official families attended the funeral in extravagant attire. Their carriages and sedan chairs clogged the roads, making it nearly impossible for passers-by to move. The day of Monk Jin's funeral was nothing short of spectacular. Towering funeral canopies stood in a continuous row, and the soul-summoning banners stretched endlessly, blocking out the sun as if casting the world into shadow. The funerary offerings made of straw were lavishly adorned with gold and silk, exuding an air of unparalleled extravagance. Dozens of ceremonial carriages, parasols, and banners accompanied the procession, alongside thousands of paper horses and over 100 paper effigies, each crafted with astonishing lifelike detail. The figures seemed so real that one could almost mistake them for living beings. Two towering deities, Feng Bi and Feng Xiang, led the way, their imposing forms constructed from paper. They wore black hats and golden armor, radiating an aura of majesty. Although their insides were hollow, wooden supports gave them structure. To make these deities appear even more animated, individuals hid inside them, manipulating internal mechanisms that caused their beards and eyebrows to move, while their eyes blinked as if shouting commands. Onlookers marveled at the display, though timid children, seeing the deities from afar, often burst into tears and fled in fright. Monk Jin's tomb was equally magnificent, resembling an imperial palace. The burial site featured an intricate arrangement of halls and pavilions, interconnected by corridors and chambers. The vast burial grounds, spanning dozens of acres, were so labyrinthine that anyone who entered risked becoming hopelessly lost, finding it difficult to find their way out. The array of offerings and sacrificial items was beyond count, with rare and exotic treasures so unique that even their names were unfamiliar to most. The funeral procession stretched for miles, a sea of heads moving as one. High-ranking officials and dignitaries bowed deeply, paying their respects as if they were in the presence of an emperor. Lesser officials from the local yamen prostrated themselves, crawling forward on their hands and knees, too intimidated to make a sound in the presence of Monk Jin's foster son. The entire city seemed to have poured into the streets, with men, women, children, and the elderly jostling shoulder to shoulder, sweating profusely in the summer heat. Husbands supported their wives, children clung to their fathers' backs, and friends gathered in boisterous groups. The atmosphere was one of chaotic festivity, with drums and gongs resounding, music playing loudly, and performances of acrobatics and opera punctuating the clamor. The din was so overwhelming that even conversations were drowned out. In the tightly packed crowd, people's bodies disappeared below their shoulders, leaving only a mass of bobbing heads visible. Amid the tumult, a pregnant woman suddenly went into labor. Her companions hastily pulled up their skirts to form a makeshift screen, shielding her from view. Soon, the cry of a newborn pierced through the chaos, though no one had time to ask whether it was a boy or a girl. The new mother, cradling her baby wrapped in a torn piece of her skirt, was helped by her friends, who struggled to push their way out of the crowd. The funeral procession was truly an unprecedented spectacle, a scene unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed before. After Monk Jin was laid to rest, his estate was divided into two portions. One went to his foster son, Jin Juren, and the other was given to Monk Jin's disciples. Jin Juren, having received his share of the inheritance, continued living in Monk Jin's ancestral home. The disciples also remained in the surrounding side houses. They addressed each other as brothers, and if any of them fell ill, they would take care of one another. At the end of the story, the author included the following commentary. Monk Jin is a unique figure within this group. While Chan Buddhism is traditionally divided into two main schools, his sect doesn't align with either. These people don't practice Buddhist teachings or worship deities, but they have their own distinct beliefs. I've heard people say, "Those who see through the five aggregates and remain untainted by the six dusts are called honorable monks. Those who study the Buddhist Dharma but merely sit in meditation can be called serene monks. Those who wander the world and show compassion for all beings can be called righteous monks. Those who perform music in unison and chant sutras or recite the Buddha's name are called chanting monks. And those who indulge in debauchery, shamelessly pursuing a life of greed, drink, and lust, are nothing more than corrupt monks." Now, as for Jin the monk, was he an honorable monk, a serene monk, a righteous monk, a chanting monk, or perhaps, just a corrupt monk destined for the hells? The second story is titled, The Dragon and the Spider. When Mr. Shu served as the magistrate of Qi County, the county yamen housed a small tower specifically for storing an assortment of fine delicacies. Yet, these delicacies were often mysteriously stolen, leaving the leftovers and spilled sauces scattered across the floor. The servants bore the brunt of Mr. Shu's anger and were frequently punished. Finally, a group of braver servants gathered the others to investigate the culprit. After setting up an ambush, they discovered the thief, a massive spider, measuring a staggering 50 to 60 centimeters in size. Pale with fear, the servants hurried to report their findings to Mr. Shu. Upon hearing the tale, Mr. Shu, intrigued by the unusual occurrence, instructed the maids to deliver food to the spider daily, hoping to prevent further waste. To everyone's surprise, the spider became docile. When it was hungry, it refrained from rummaging through the food stores and instead crawled out to beg for food. After eating its fill, it would quietly return to its nest. This coexistence lasted for over a year without further incident. One day, as Mr. Shu was reviewing documents in his study, the spider unexpectedly crawled onto his desk. Assuming it was hungry, Mr. Shu ordered his servants to fetch food. Suddenly, two snakes appeared silently on either side of the spider. Their bodies were as thin as chopsticks, but the spider immediately curled its legs under its abdomen, trembling in apparent fear, unwilling to confront the snakes. In the blink of an eye, the snakes grew larger, their bodies thickening until they were as wide as chicken eggs. Mr. Shu was paralyzed with shock and just about to flee when a deafening thunderclap erupted from the sky. The sound was so loud it seemed to shake the heavens. A bolt of lightning struck down, smashing through the roof of the yamen. The once tranquil yamen turned into a scene of hellfire, with lightning reducing it to rubble. Mr. Shu himself was struck by the lightning and lost consciousness. When Mr. Shu eventually came to, he discovered that his wife, his maids, and all 7 of his servants had been killed by the lightning strike. Shattered by the disaster, Mr. Shu's health deteriorated. He lingered bedridden for over a month but ultimately succumbed to his grief and injuries. Mr. Shu had always been a just and compassionate official, deeply loved by the people of Qi County. On the day of his burial, the townsfolk spontaneously donated money to give him a proper send-off. Their cries of mourning echoed across the fields, a testament to the profound respect and admiration they held for him. At the end of the story, the author provides the following commentary. Regarding the tale of the dragon and the spider, I always thought it was nothing more than an absurd rumor spread among the common folk. Could such an event truly happen? I have often heard that when divine lightning strikes humans, it usually targets the most wicked of souls. How, then, could a righteous and benevolent official like Mr. Shu suffer such a terrible fate? Alas, the heavens make their judgments with such blindness and cruelty far too often. Alright. That's all for today's tales, Monk Jean and The Dragon and the Spider. If you enjoyed these stories, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.